Have you ever stopped to really notice what happens when people gain even just a tiny fraction of power?
Oh, it is such a subtle shift, but you can feel it.
You really can. It changes the temperature of the room almost instantly. Think about it. You get a minor promotion at work, or maybe a new leadership role in a neighborhood community group.
Or even just realizing you suddenly have the upper hand in an argument at home.
Exactly. When that little bit of power lands in someone's lap, the absolute undeniable human instinct is to use it. We're going to explore some moments of genuine wonder, some deeply rich practical life applications, and look at a radical redefinition of what true power actually looks like. Okay, let's unpack this, because this message gets straight to the very heart of how you and I interact with everyone around us on a daily basis.
It demands that we look at ourselves honestly. Because when we start digging into this material, it forces us to look in the mirror and question some of our most fundamental, closely held assumptions about human nature.
Right.
We all like to tell ourselves a very comforting story, like if we were handed immense power, we would be the exception.
Oh, absolutely. We'd say, I would use it only for good.
Right. We'd be completely fair, endlessly generous, completely selfless. But the reality of human history, and frankly, the reality of our own daily habits, tells a much more uncomfortable story.
It really does. And from the pastor's message, we see this played out in what we could call the world's default operating system. The natural direction of the world is incredibly simple, yet incredibly destructive. The rule is basically, if you have power, you use it.
Yeah.
If you have rights, you claim them to the absolute bitter end just to maintain your position. It is all about grasping, accumulating, and keeping.
And we see the tragic results of that grasping everywhere, sometimes in the places we least expect. As the pastor shared with us, there was a really heavy-hearted incident in a Korean church recently that perfectly illustrates how insidious this can be.
Yeah, that was a tough story to hear.
It was. It came to light that a senior pastor, someone who outwardly appeared incredibly gentle, kind, and spiritually mature to his congregation, had actually been using severe insults and verbal abuse toward his assistant pastors for years.
Wow.
To the thousands of people sitting in the pews, he was a caring shepherd. But behind closed doors, to the people who worked under him, there was a dark, controlling environment, driven entirely by the unchecked misuse of power.
When you hear a story like that, the immediate reflex is defensive, isn't it?
Oh, completely.
We want to say, wow, how could something like that happen in a church? We treat it like a shocking anomaly. We want to brush it off and say, well, that is just a deeply flawed individual. A special case. It's a way of distancing ourselves from the behavior.
It is entirely a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
We distance ourselves because acknowledging the root of that behavior means acknowledging what lives inside of us.
Exactly.
One of the most striking points from the sermon notes was the reminder that this incident didn't just fall out of the sky. This dynamic is not confined to church leadership or isolated scandals. Power, slowly concentrating into one person or one group, happens quietly everywhere, every single day.
It really does.
It creates an atmosphere where dissenting voices are muted. The leader's word becomes absolute, unquestioned authority. And the people underneath, whether they are employees, church members, or even family members, end up deeply hurt, but find it almost impossibly difficult to speak up.
Let's bring that right down to the ground level, to your everyday life. Because you don't need a congregation of thousands to fall into this trap. Think about the workplace. Have you ever been handed a project to lead, and your very first instinct isn't to collaborate, but to manage and control everyone's output?
Or think about our homes.
Right.
It is almost a cliche, but how often does a parent, instead of sitting down to have a difficult, meaningful conversation with a child to explain the why behind a rule, just default to the ultimate trump card?
Because I'm the parent.
That is such a relatable example. It is a shortcut through power. We don't want to do the hard work of relationships, so we just use authority to shut the conversation down.
And it happens in subtle ways with adults, too. Think about being in a committee meeting or even a PTA meeting. When someone raises a differing opinion, what is our genuine, unfiltered internal reaction?
We rarely think, oh, I wonder why they see it that way. Let me explore that.
Never. Our first thought is almost always, I really wish that person would just stay quiet so we can do this my way. We crave that control. And the brilliant, uncomfortable truth the pastor brought up is how we disguise this desire for control. We don't call it dominance.
No, we call it order.
Yes, order. We claim we are just keeping the peace, but underneath we are utilizing whatever leverage we have to press people down and elevate ourselves.
To really grasp why we are so deeply wired to operate this way, we have to trace this impulse back to its absolute origin. We have to look at the very beginning of the biblical narrative. If we turn back to Genesis 3.5, we find the blueprint for this entire human struggle.
The garden.
The garden.
Yeah.
The very first temptation presented to humanity wasn't simply to break a rule or eat a piece of fruit. The serpent's promise was, you will be like God.
That reframes the whole story. It wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment or simple mistake. It was a power grab.
Precisely. As the pastor shared with us, that moment set the fundamental trajectory of human existence. From that point in the garden onward, human beings have been obsessed with moving upward. We constantly try to seize power.
We desperately want to be the ones who sit in the judge's seat.
Deciding what is good and what is evil for everyone else. We want to be the sole authors of our own reality. And because every single person is trying to do this simultaneously, human history has become this endless, exhausting competition for elevation. We are all just climbing over each other, trying to reach the top of a ladder that never ends.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because right against that exhausting, frantic backdrop of humanity endlessly clawing its way upward, the text in Philippians chapter 2 introduces a reversal that is absolutely breathtaking.
It really is.
It presents the ultimate contrast to the Genesis story. Adam tried to take God's place and move upward, but Jesus came downward to take the place of humanity.
Such a powerful image.
Human beings have spent thousands of years desperately trying to become God, and in doing so, we avoid suffering, we avoid humility, we avoid the cross at all costs. But God became human, and he intentionally, deliberately walked toward the cross.
We really need to pause and sit with the weight of that contrast, because it is the absolute hinge of the entire Christian faith. We cannot reduce this to a cute moral fable.
Right.
This isn't Aesop's fables telling you to be a little nicer to your coworkers. It is a fundamental seismic shift in the direction of human existence. We are a species moving upward, obsessed with rising above others. But God is a God who moves downward, willingly stepping into the dirt and the brokenness to save us. It is a complete inversion of how we expect the universe to work and how we expect power to operate.
Let's dig into how that inversion changes our view of power. The text in Philippians 2.6 says that Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. I want to ask about that phrase, very nature. In the English translation, nature or form almost sounds like a costume.
Like putting on the appearance of something.
Exactly. What is the original language actually getting at there?
That is a crucial distinction to make. In the original Greek, the word used for nature or form doesn't mean an outward temporary appearance or a disguise. It refers to the essential, unchangeable, absolute state of a being, the core identity. So the text is saying Jesus wasn't just someone behaving in a godly way or a human putting on a divine mask. He was fully and completely revealing exactly how God exists and operates.
So if Jesus is showing us exactly how God operates, why does it look so different from what we naturally expect? Because if I am honest, when we think of an all-powerful God, we usually picture a cosmic CEO.
We really do.
We picture a king on a throne demanding compliance, maybe throwing lightning bolts when things get out of line.
And that is the deeply confronting question you have to ask yourself as you listen to this. What kind of being do you actually imagine God to be? Because we naturally build our image of God based on the earthly leaders we see around us.
That makes sense.
How do earthly kings and CEOs operate? They command from a safe distance. They control. They stand above the fray. They demand absolute obedience. And they use fear as a tool to maintain order. Because human power operates from the top down, we automatically project that onto God. We assume God must rule the exact same way, just on an infinite scale. We imagine a God who is constantly pressing down from the top.
But the reality of divine power as we see it lived out is entirely different. One of the most moving parts of the pastor's message was the invitation to just look at the actual documented life of Jesus.
Just look at how he lived.
He had all the power in the universe, yet he never once displayed it through fear. He didn't dominate people. He didn't demand that anyone grovel before him to earn an audience. Instead, his entire life was a deliberate, continuous downward trajectory.
Always moving down.
He came down beneath people. He actively sought out the lowest places. He went down to the sick, to the cultural outcasts, to the tables of people society had labeled as untouchable sinners. He even went as far down as stripping off his outer clothing, taking a towel and kneeling in the dirt to wash the filthy feet of his own disciples.
What's fascinating here is the core realization that flips our understanding of the world completely upside down. The power of the world presses people down from above, but the power of God lifts people up from below.
Wow.
I really want you to let that sink in. The power of the world moves people through coercion and fear, but the power of God transforms people through service and love. We have this habit of looking at the cross as a moment of temporary weakness. We view it as a tragic, ugly necessity that had to happen before the triumphant victory of the resurrection. But that misses the profound truth of Philippians 2.
It misses the whole point.
The cross is not an interruption of God's power or a moment of weakness. It is his exact way of ruling. Giving himself away entirely for the sake of love is the ultimate unrivaled demonstration of divine power.
That brings us perfectly to verse 7, which is arguably the point of the whole passage. It says, "Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant." Some translations say he emptied himself. I know there is a massive theological word for this, kenosis.
Yes, kenosis.
But emptying himself sounds incredibly dangerous. Does that mean Jesus stopped being God or lost his identity?
It is a concept that is very easily misunderstood.
Yeah.
The word is kenosis, which translates to self-emptying. But we need to be very precise here. Kenosis absolutely does not mean that Jesus abandoned his divinity, erased his identity, or somehow became less than God. He didn't lose himself.
So what does it mean?
What it means is that he laid down his self-centeredness. He voluntarily set aside a life that could have been entirely centered on his own rights, his own privileges, his own glory. Instead, he opened himself completely for the sake of love. True kenosis isn't about self-hatred. It isn't about walking around with terrible self-esteem or making yourself small so others can step all over you. It is about possessing immense security and choosing to use whatever privilege or power you have entirely for the sake of lifting up someone else.
That distinction changes everything. It's not self-erasure. It's self-giving.
Exactly.
You have to be incredibly secure in who you are to be able to give yourself away like that. And as we process this, there's an insight from the sermon notes that I found incredibly moving. Jesus had to come down because we simply cannot.
We can't do it.
We are entirely too busy protecting ourselves. Think about how much mental and emotional energy you spend every single day guarding your pride, fighting for your rights, justifying your actions, and securing your position in the hierarchy. We literally do not know how to go down. We are terrified of it. So Jesus came down to the absolute lowest place on our behalf.
And that downward movement to the cross is God's ultimate declaration of love.
Yep.
It is the definitive proof that we are already accepted. If you can allow that specific truth to move from your head down into your heart, it alters the landscape of your life.
How so?
Because if you're already a deeply loved, fully accepted child of God, you are suddenly free. You no longer have to participate in that frantic, exhausting climb upward. You don't have to endlessly prove your worth to your boss, your spouse, or your peers anymore. Your identity is secure, which means you can finally stop grasping.
And how radically does that alter our day-to-day reality? Because this theology isn't just meant to be debated in a classroom. It is meant to change how we live tomorrow morning. Take a marriage conflict, for example.
We've all been there.
You are in the middle of a heated argument. The tension in your chest is tight. In those moments, the fight is rarely about the actual issue. The dishes, the schedule, the finances. What is it really about?
It is almost always about who is willing to lay their pride down first. It is about who gets to be right, who gets the last word, who holds the power. The same exact dynamic plays out at work, or even in the church lobby. Most disputes you encounter don't stem from a lack of skill or a genuine ideological divide. They stem from two egos colliding. It is two people, deeply insecure, both absolutely refusing to go downward.
When we fiercely hold on to our pride, when we demand our own way, when we insist that our exact phrasing is used, the relationship fractures. So applying this concept of kenosis, this self-emptying, isn't some mystical, out-of-reach spiritual meditation. It's a highly practical, deeply gritty daily choice.
A very hard choice.
It is the incredibly difficult choice to yield, even when you have the receipts and you know you are objectively right. It is the choice to look at the person across from you and decide to value the relationship more than your own pride. It is the active decision to lift them up instead of pressing them down, to declare yourself the winner.
But let's be honest, making that choice feels like a kind of death.
It really does.
It goes against every survival instinct we have. To consistently make that choice to go downward, you have to deeply trust the ultimate verdict on that kind of life. You have to know how the story ends. When we look at verses 9 through 11, we see God's final resounding judgment on the downward path Jesus took. Now, if you were a Roman citizen watching the crucifixion, Jesus' life looked like an unmitigated failure.
A total disaster.
He didn't overthrow the government. He didn't build an earthly kingdom. He amassed no fortune, had no worldly throne, and commanded no army. He died a humiliating criminal's death in the dirt. According to every single metric of power the world respects, his method was foolish. The world says you cannot change an empire by dying for it.
The world respects force, but God's verdict is completely different. The scripture says, "Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name." God looked at the entirety of Jesus' life, a life of downward immobility, of befriending outcasts, of washing dirty feet, of enduring unimaginable shame purely for the sake of love. And God declared, "This is what true royalty looks like. This is the king."
The true king.
The king that every knee in the universe will ultimately bow to is not a king who conquered his enemies with a bloodied sword, but a king who wore a servant's towel, who knelt down in the dust, and who did the heavy, unseen work of lifting humanity up.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals the true heart of the universe. God permanently, infinitely honors those who are willing to come down to bring life to others. He completely and utterly rejects the world's standard of success.
Completely rejects it.
The world hands out its awards, its magazine covers, and its applause to the people who ruthlessly crush others on their way to the top. The world idolizes the people who hoard power and demand to be served. But God exalts the one who empties himself. It is a total cosmic reversal of everything we naturally value.
Which brings us to the most challenging yet most beautiful part of this deep dive. As we reflect on everything from the pastor's message, we are left with some highly personal questions. And I want you to ask these of yourself right now. Think about the physical spaces you occupy: your home, your office cubicle, your church group, your circle of friends. Are your words and your actions bringing life to the people around you, or are they subtly tearing them down?
That is a hard question.
It is. When you are handed a little bit of authority, even over something trivial, do you use it as a stepping stone to climb higher, pressing others down to boost your own ego? Or are you willing to go downward? Are you willing to embrace the uncomfortable, beautiful path of Jesus for the sake of the people standing right in front of you? So what does this all mean? It means that the true, authentic way of the kingdom of God is never found in ascending to the top of the ladder. It is found in the quiet, downward path of lifting others up.
It is a lifelong daily journey to unlearn the grasping path of Adam and to embrace the yielding path of Jesus. And as we close our time together, I want to leave you with a completely different thought to mull over in the quiet moments of your week. We've spent this time talking deeply about how true power is found in stepping down and serving. I want you to mentally pull up a picture of the most powerful person in your life right now.
Think of their face.
Maybe it is your boss, a parent, a mentor, or even a public figure you deeply admire. Look at how they operate. Do they fit the world's definition of power, demanding compliance, controlling outcomes, constantly standing above the fray? Or do they fit the kenosis definition, emptying themselves, serving quietly, lifting others up from below? And more importantly, as you look at your own reflection in the mirror, how might viewing your daily interactions through this downward lens completely change the way you speak to your spouse, your children, or your coworkers tomorrow morning? If you truly let go of the exhausting need to prove your own worth, how much more freely could you love the people who need you most?
That is such a clarifying lens to view our lives through. The incredible freedom of knowing you are already deeply, completely loved, which allows you to finally stop climbing the ladder and start washing feet. We hope this reflection on Philippians 2 has been as moving, as confronting, and as deeply inspiring for you as it has been for us. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. May you find the courage to walk that downward path of grace, peace, and true power this week. Take care.